I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was past 10, and the street lamps outside Hamza's building cast long, uneven shadows across the cracked pavement. I had come over to grab a borrowed textbook, but the apartment smelled like cardamom tea anyway, like it always did. That smell stuck to the walls, seeped into the carpet, lingered in the quiet corners where the sofa cushions sagged. Aisha Auntie was there, of course. Her hair tied loosely at the nape, gray streaks catching the lamplight through the thin curtain. She looked like someone who had learned to fold her life into neat, invisible compartments. And yet, even now, the faint crease at the corner of her eyes suggested laughter, or maybe impatience. I couldn't tell which, and that was the point. I never could. "Ah, you're here," she said, voice low, careful, almost like she wasn't quite supposed to notice. "Still studying late." I shrugged, fumbling with my bag strap. "Yeah, final coming up." My eyes drifted toward her hands as she stirred the tea in that chipped mug. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did. That tiny pause before she looked up again, the way she tilted her head slightly, it made the air feel heavier than the humid night outside. She remembered my coffee order from the cafe 2 months ago. Black, no sugar, extra hot. I had never asked her to, and yet, when she handed me a glass of lukewarm tea she had meant for herself, she said, "I tried to make it stronger. Don't know if it's enough." Her lips curved into something that could have been a joke or a warning. I smiled faintly, heart weirdly tugged, and looked down at my hands. They were folded in my lap, but my fingers kept twitching. I tried not to notice the way her eyes lingered on them, the way her left thumb tapped against the table edge almost unconsciously. I thought about the texts I never sent, the ones I paused before hitting send, letting them hover in the drafts folder like hesitant ghosts. They were always half jokes, half confessions, and fully unremarkable. But somehow, they felt like tiny betrayals of my own sense of control. I glanced at her again, and my throat went dry, as though noticing her breathing had been an accidental sin. We spoke in clipped sentences, careful not to stretch the conversation too long, yet too short to satisfy. "Hamza's out tonight?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Yeah, he said he'd be back after midnight." "Why?" Her voice was soft, curious, not probing. But there was weight in it, a small gravity I couldn't name. I shrugged again. My eyes flicked to the napkin I had been absent-mindedly folding and unfolding. My chest felt like it was humming with a low, unplaceable tension. One glance at her hand, brushing the edge of the mug, and the air seemed to constrict in a way that made me aware of every inch of the small living room. I wanted to say something that mattered, but the words refused to form. Instead, I just nodded. She smiled faintly, an almost imperceptible upturn, and the moment stretched too long and ended too soon. As I turned to leave, I found a note on the table, folded neatly beneath her mug. I picked it up, thumb brushing the edge. It was her number. Not for Hamza, not for the household chores or the tea, but for me. Just me. I didn't open it then. I couldn't. But I pocketed it, heart beating too fast, mind already circling back to the unfinished conversation, the unasked questions, the half-jokes that might mean more than they should. And when I walked down the hallway toward the door, I realized I had no idea what I was about to do with this, or where it might lead. But I knew, somehow, I would come back. The next evening, I found myself back at Hamza's place, though I didn't know why. I told myself it was just to return the textbook. I told myself I wasn't expecting anything. But the faint smell of cardamom tea, the familiar creak of the floorboards, made me forget all the reasons I shouldn't be here. Aisha Auntie was in the kitchen, humming quietly to herself, the kettle clicking as it reached a boil. I leaned against the doorway, hands shoved in my jacket pockets, watching her move. She looked ordinary, but in a way that somehow made ordinary feel rare. "You're persistent," she said without looking up. There was a playful tilt in her voice, the kind that could be teasing or testing or maybe both. I shrugged, trying to seem casual. "I forgot my notebook last week. Thought I'd check if it was here." She glanced at me, then back at the stove, stirring slowly. "You're always forgetting something." Her voice carried a quiet amusement, but her eyes softened for a fraction of a second. That fraction hung between us like a pause that said more than words could. I didn't know how to respond. Instead, I stepped closer, leaning on the counter, pretending to examine the teacups. My eyes kept flicking to her hands, the way her fingers traced the edge of a chipped saucer. I imagined reaching out, letting my thumb brush hers by accident, and shivered at the thought. I remember when Hamza was little, she said suddenly, almost to herself. He used to insist I make him pancakes on Sunday mornings. Burn half of them, too. She laughed quietly, a low, hesitant sound. He didn't care. I nodded, swallowing something I didn't recognize. I like that, I said softly, before realizing how strange it might sound. But she didn't recoil. She just looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing whether I was serious or whether I should be taken seriously. The room was quiet except for the faint hiss of the kettle and the soft scrape of spoon against the ceramic mug. I thought about all the reasons I shouldn't feel this way. She was Hamza's mom. Divorced, yes, but not someone I should imagine leaning toward. And yet, in that silence, the distance between her and me seemed smaller than it ever should. I reached to pick up a teacup she had just filled, and our hands brushed. My fingers lingered a fraction too long over hers. She didn't pull away, didn't comment. She just tilted her head slightly, her eyes catching mine for a heartbeat that stretched longer than it had any right to. I cleared my throat, setting the cup down. Thanks, I said. She smiled faintly, eyes crinkling, but it was quieter than usual. Don't thank me for tea. And then she turned, pouring more, humming that same tune. But the way her gaze returned to me, subtle and unspoken, made my chest tighten. I walked out that night with the memory of her thumb brushing against mine. Just a touch, brief, nothing, and yet somehow everything. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I didn't plan on going back that night. But the street was wet from an early drizzle, and my steps carried me toward Hamza's building anyway. The smell of rain on asphalt mixed with the faint cardamom from the apartment above, a combination I hadn't realized I'd missed until I did. She was in the living room this time, sitting on the sofa with a book. Her hair fell loosely over one shoulder, gray streaks catching the lamplight like a halo I should notice. I hesitated at the doorway. You're late, she said, soft, almost casual. Her eyes flicked toward the clock behind me. Not an accusation, just observation. Sorry, I mumbled, kicking my shoes off and dropping my bag. My hands felt heavy, too aware of the space between us. She closed the book, setting it on the coffee table. You don't need to apologize. Her voice carried a quiet warmth, but there was a slight edge, the kind that made me second-guess whether I should be here at all. I nodded, and we settled into the awkward rhythm of proximity. She poured 2 cups of tea, and we sipped without speaking. The silence stretched, and every little movement, the scrape of the cup, the tilt of her head, felt loaded. I sometimes think about moving back to my hometown, she said after a while, almost whispering. It's quieter, safer. She didn't look at me, but I felt the words meant something, even if I didn't know what. I wanted to say something about feeling stuck, about being seen, but my voice didn't come. Instead, I just nodded. My fingers traced the rim of my cup, heart jittering. Halfway through the tea, the door swung open. Hamza, in his hoodie, carrying groceries. He froze for a second, caught us in the frame. My stomach dropped. She smiled quickly, politely, like the interruption was a necessary shield. Hey, Hamza said. You two talking. He didn't linger, but the moment hung. I felt exposed, suddenly clumsy in my own skin. As he moved to the kitchen, I realized how close we'd been. My hand brushed hers on the armrest. She didn't pull away immediately, only shifted slightly, just enough to remind me of boundaries. My chest tightened. I imagined, just for a second, leaning closer, letting the silence fill with something more. The thought made me dizzy. Her gaze flicked to mine, and I saw the hesitation there mirrored mine. Not fear exactly, but a warning. We both stayed still, suspended in that near touch, near confession. The room smelled of wet coats, tea, and the faint sweetness of something unspoken. My fingers twitched against the armrest. Her eyes softened and narrowed all at once, like she was weighing consequences I couldn't name. I wanted to speak, to break the quiet with something real, but the words refused me. Instead, I just exhaled slowly, aware of the almostness of the moment, almost a touch, almost a confession, almost everything. And when Hamza called out from the kitchen, laughing about spilling a bag of carrots, it broke the spell. We both flinched, and the tension slid back into small gestures, a sip of tea, a shift in posture, a half-smile that said nothing and everything. I left that night with the memory of her hand inches from mine, the warmth in her eyes, and the ache of knowing we had almost crossed a line. Almost. Not quite. And somehow, that made it worse. I found myself walking with her along the empty street behind Hamza's building. Rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and cool, the pavement reflecting the dim glow of streetlights. I hadn't planned to come out here. I told myself it was just to help her carry groceries, but every step felt heavier than it should. She walked a little ahead, umbrella tilted against the dampness, and I noticed the way her coat hung loose at the shoulders. Ordinary, and yet I couldn't stop staring. My chest tightened like a coil I couldn't unwind. I saw Hamza laughing with his friend today, I said quietly, trying to sound casual. My fingers flexed around the strap of the grocery bag I was holding. She glanced at me, almost startled. Oh, her voice was soft, careful. She didn't move closer or away, just balanced on the edge of something. I wanted to say more, to let her know how strange it was to see her flinch at his laughter, how it made my chest twist in a way I didn't understand. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I let the silence stretch. It felt too loud. I don't like it, I admitted finally, barely above a whisper. Not that he laughs, but I don't know. Seeing him, my fingers tighten on the bag. Seeing him makes me uneasy. Her steps faltered. She looked down at the pavement, the umbrella tilting, and I realized how exposed she suddenly looked, as if she were suddenly younger than I'd ever seen her. I didn't know you felt that way, she said softly. Her hand brushed against mine on the bag. An accident, or maybe not, and I felt the low hum of something forbidden coil through me. I clear my throat. I don't know why I'm saying this. The words were fragments, half-formed, like all the things I'd never dare to say. She stopped walking. The umbrella tilted slightly, catching the streetlight. Maybe you don't need to say it. Her voice was quiet, almost a murmur, but the pause stretched long enough that the air between us felt charged, almost unbearable. I looked at her, the small curve of her lips, the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers lingered on the grocery bag, just a heartbeat too long. But I can't not, I whispered. Her eyes met mine, steady now, open in a way that made me want to crawl forward and collapse into the confession I hadn't fully formed. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. Only the quiet hum of the street and our shared breath filled the gap. I wanted to reach for her, for the warmth of something real, for the pause that had stretched between words for too long. My fingers twitched, hovering near hers, like a question I couldn't voice. And then why? She asked, soft, uncertain. A single word, but heavy with everything we hadn't said, everything we had almost allowed ourselves to feel. I froze. I didn't have an answer. And in that silence, I realized that the next step, whatever it would be, might not be mine to decide. She didn't answer that night, or the next. Not the texts, not the calls. I stared at the phone, so long it felt like it had absorbed the heat from my palm. Each time it buzzed, I hoped. Each time it didn't, my chest sank a little lower. When I saw her again, at Hamza's apartment, it was different. She moved around the kitchen with precision, quiet efficiency, but there was a stiffness I hadn't noticed before. She avoided my eyes, hummed more than she spoke, and every glance at me felt like a calculation. Hamza asked me to pick up a few things, she said without looking at me, holding a grocery bag so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Thought I'd get them before it got too late. I nodded. My fingers itched for contact, for the familiar brush of hers, but I stopped myself. Instead, I just followed shadow-like, lingering at a careful distance. Later, I noticed a photograph on the counter. A younger man, maybe in his 20s, standing next to her, with an older woman and a small boy. My stomach dropped before I even registered the faces. I didn't ask. I didn't breathe. I just noticed. She caught me staring, and for a moment, her eyes softened. Then she looked away, quickly, as if the moment had been dangerous. My chest ached. Questions pressed at my throat, but I swallowed them. Some things, maybe, weren't mine to ask. I tried to speak the next day, sent a text that lingered in drafts for hours, then deleted it. My mind played the scene over and over. Her pulling back, me standing too close, the faint tremor in her hand as she moved past me. Each memory was a pinch, sharp and unrelenting. She was there, but she wasn't. At dinner, she laughed at Hamza's jokes a little louder than usual, a little brighter, as if filling a space I wasn't meant to occupy. And I sat there, arms crossed, pretending to watch the TV, while my thoughts circled in quiet panic. I imagined a dozen ways to make it right, to ask, to bridge the distance. Each idea faded before I could act. The window of opportunity felt thinner than ever. I wanted to knock on the door, to pull her aside, to ask the question I couldn't. But the words stuck somewhere deep, lodged where courage had once been. That night, I left the apartment building with empty hands. No texts sent, no calls made. The street was quiet, the rain from the night before leaving tiny puddles I didn't notice. My chest felt hollow, like the silence itself had weight. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. And somehow that was worse. I found her in the kitchen, alone this time, the apartment quieter than usual. Hamza had gone to a late class, and the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the room. She was leaning against the counter, hands wrapped around a mug, staring out the window at the rain-slicked street. I hesitated at the doorway. My chest felt tight, but the weight of months of unsent words pressed harder. I could turn and leave. I could pretend nothing had changed. Or I could step forward. I started, voice trailing off. My fingers fumbled with the edge of my sleeve. I didn't know if I should come. She looked at me, finally, eyes catching mine in a way that held both caution and invitation. A small crease appeared between her brows. "You didn't have to," she said softly. Her voice wasn't accusing, just steady. I shifted closer, careful to respect the invisible line between us. I wasn't sure you wanted me here. Not really. My hands twitched, and I realized my thumb had been brushing against the edge of the counter, as if it could anchor me. She exhaled a slow, quiet sound. I didn't know what I wanted either. Her hands tightened around the mug. Maybe I still don't. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't a declaration. But in their simplicity, the tension dissolved just enough that I could breathe. I let myself notice the small things, the way her eyes softened when she looked at me, the faint tremor in her hand, the warmth radiating from the mug between us. I took a careful step closer. Ikare, more than I should. The admission felt like dropping a stone into a still pond, silent ripples spreading through the room. Her gaze lingered on me, and for a moment, I thought the world had narrowed to just us, just that quiet kitchen, just the rain outside. Then she did something I had waited months to feel. Her hand brushed mine, light, almost accidental. But the contact carried everything I hadn't said. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension slip into something fragile, human. "Okay," she murmured, as if answering a question I hadn't asked aloud. Her thumb pressed against mine briefly, and I felt a simple, quiet certainty. Not a promise, not a vow, just acknowledgement, just presence. I didn't need more. No words could capture the months of hesitation, the longing, the fear of missteps. It was enough that she was here, that she allowed me here, that we could just exist in the same space, unspoken but understood. I leaned back slightly, just enough to create a little space between us, but stayed close. She looked down at the mug, then back at me, a faint, careful smile forming at the corners of her lips. "Okay," I said softly, echoing her. The rain tapped lightly against the window. The apartment smelled faintly of cardamom and damp, of home, and of everything we hadn't yet risked saying. And that was enough. It was 8:47 a.m. when I found her in the kitchen, just like the first time I noticed the way her hands moved over the chipped mugs. Black coffee in hers, tea in mind, the steam rising in lazy spirals. The apartment smelled faintly of cardamom, of rain that had soaked the streets last night, of quiet routines that had become ours. We didn't speak at first. I leaned against the counter, watching her pour milk into my cup, the way she hesitated for just a fraction of a second, remembering that I didn't take sugar. Tiny gestures, ordinary ones, but they meant everything. Hamza left early. I asked finally, voice low. Yeah, she said, stirring her coffee. Class conflict. Her lips curved faintly, almost a smile, almost nothing. I didn't need more. Months had passed since that night on the wet street. The near confession, the unsent texts, the moments we had nearly crossed lines we weren't ready for. The tension had softened, replaced by a quiet rhythm that was ours. She still teased sometimes, eyes flicking to mine when I said something awkward. I still felt that low hum in my chest when she brushed against my arm accidentally, or not. We had learned to move carefully, but not at a distance. I remembered the bench outside the apartment, the one we had sat on when the rain had stopped that night. Nothing dramatic happened there. No declarations, just presence. And that was enough. I reached for the newspaper, and she picked up the mug I had forgotten. Our fingers brushed for a second. She didn't flinch. I didn't hesitate. Small contact, ordinary, quiet, but I felt the years of hesitation, longing, and restraint fold into that instant. More coffee? She asked, voice soft. Please, I said, and we settled into our small, familiar routine. Quiet sipping, occasional glances, long pauses that spoke more than words ever could. The world outside moved on. Hamza went to class, work piled up, the streets got wet, dried, and wet again. But here, in the small apartment with the lingering cardamom scent and chipped mugs, life had its own slow heartbeat. Ours. I thought about the first note she left under her mug, the number I had hesitated to open, the nights of unsent messages, the moments we almost let ourselves fall, almost let the world intrude. And now, sitting across from her, sharing a morning neither of us claimed but both inhabited, it felt earned. She glanced at me, eyes catching the morning light just right, and I caught the faintest trace of the smile she reserved for the rare, private moments. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Okay, I said quietly. Her eyes flicked to mine, soft and knowing. Okay, she replied. No grand confessions. No dramatic endings. Just this, a routine, a warmth, a small acknowledgement that we had been seen, and we had returned to each other. And I thought, as I always did when our hands brushed or a shared glance lingered too long, some things aren't shouted. Some things are lived. Some things, just us, are enough.